Hello and welcome to the PathLock Innovation Series. We are excited to have you here today. Our first session today is with Deloitte and named Time for a Revamp, Designing a Framework for the Future of Controls. Our presenters today are Rubin and Sachin Singh, and they will introduce themselves in just a moment.
Great, thanks Stephanie, and thank you to our wonderful producers that are making the magic happen behind the scenes. So hi everyone, I'm Rubin, Deloitte's Controls Advisory Leader, and I'm so grateful for all of you that have taken the time out of your increasingly busy days to join us today as we take you through our point of view on the future of controls. And wherever you're joining us from, I do hope that you and your families are staying safe, that everyone is healthy, and that as we go through the presentation today, that we're able to inspire you to think about some of the content that we cover over the next few weeks before most people shut things down for the holidays. Today I'm joined here by Sachin Singh. Sachin's a leader in our cyber and controls practices, and I'm lucky enough to be able to team with him on some of our most complex clients. And we also get to team together behind the scenes on experimenting with pushing the boundaries of what controls can and should be. So maybe with that said, why don't we move on to the next slide and we'll take a quick look at what we're going to discuss today. So we thought that we would kick it off with a bit of a overview of the current environment, some of the trends that we're seeing. We'll talk about the three key levers that we've identified as setting organizations up for a successful journey through the future of controls. Then we'll take a little bit of time to talk about what that framework might look like in a modern day. We'll take some time to walk through some of the great tech advances that we've seen some people take and where we can go with automation and beyond. And then we'll talk about operating models. How do you build a model that not just gets it done, but that's also sustainable and that gives back to the organization as well. Throughout, we'll try to embed anecdotes from the field and real live client stories to make this real and not just theory. And then at the end, we'll just wrap it up with some key takeaways, and hopefully we'll have time for Q&A from the audience. So with that said, why don't we move on to the next slide? Okay, so from a trend standpoint, as we've been going through and meeting with clients, hundreds of clients over the last few years and kind of shaping this point of view, the same key trends keep coming up in our conversations. A lot around emerging regulations that are coming out and the way that the regulators are acting differently in the field as they're doing inspections, as they're sending comment letters, as they're really trying to kind of carve out where their spot is in the playing field. We're seeing obviously data not just as an asset, but as the fuel and the lifeblood for organizations. A lot of great tools have become available that are democratizing that access to the data. But what we're seeing is that data is not always consistent from system to system, tool to tool. And so that is creating risk for organizations in areas where they need to lean in. As we think about the era of consumer and their demands, we're seeing an increased expectation from consumers that they will be able to get access to your organization, your products, your services in the way that they want it and at a time that they want it. And so we continue to see that evolve in terms of their demands for capability in terms of tech, automation, preferences, and that increases the need for controls that will allow for that type of alignment. We're also seeing obviously continued expense on digital transformation. If you're like anything, like most of my clients, austerity measures have been put in. People must do more with less, as the cliche might go. But really, in a year like this year, it has to be, right? Because open seats on org charts aren't being filled each day. The CNBC, the Wall Street Journal, Fox Business, wherever you get your business news, there's a new story about another organization with cost containment measures, and obviously it's being rewarded by the markets. We saw it with Spotify yesterday. We've seen it with a number of the tech companies, but it's very real. And these are people's lives, these are people's jobs, and then those that are remaining after have to figure out how to continue to maintain the operation of the business. And so a lot of organizations continue to invest in digital, and we'll talk a little bit about that here. And then finally, responsible business, ESG, SCE. It goes by a number of different acronyms right now, but there's expectations both from a regulatory view, a customer-facing view, and even within the boards and the pillars of the organizations, that we will continue to make these shifts, these pivots, or enhance where we're already doing great. And so these trends are what we're seeing in the marketplace, and with all of them, they do pose their own unique risks, challenges that need to be overcome. And obviously, where we see risk, organizations tend to adapt control in response to that risk. Sachin, why don't we go on to the next slide? Okay. So, in response to that, we've come up with what we think is a three-legged stool that will help organizations to be able to mitigate that risk. And so, we know that this may take on different meaning to different organizations depending on where you are on your journey. And so, we do want to level set what we're thinking about with future of controls with these three levers. So one, reconstructing the controls framework, meaning refreshing that alignment of risk and control across the constituents that you're responsible towards. In a number of our organizations, you have multiple competing frameworks, multiple competing risk centers and control centers. And so there's an opportunity in most organizations to ratify, to consolidate, and to be able to make the most of the tools, the assets, the people in the organization. In terms of designing the next generation operating model, there's opportunity to enhance the skills of your best and your brightest. If we can enable them with data-driven approaches, if we can arm them with digital solutions that flip the script on controls, and making that shift from being hindsight focused, what happened 6 months ago, 9 months ago, and calling it into question today, making that shift from there to what's happening in the here and now. And can we leverage AI models to even put controls on the offensive and get predictive in nature? And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Establishing the controls technology ecosystem is the final leg on the stool. And so we'll talk about how it all comes together in the real world proven results, where you might want to think about getting started and how to gain influence through your organization as you look to expand your program. Next slide. Okay, and so controls framework, as I mentioned, what we see at a lot of our clients is that there is no shortage of controls programs and control activity happening at the organization. Is it truly optimized, and is it being done in the most efficient and effective way possible for the organization? In most organizations, you'd probably say no. We do continue to see a lot of overlap between competing functions. How many SOX controls in IT also relate to PCI or to ISO or to NIST? If you're a bank, you may have to comply with GLBA, which is one set of privacy requirements, but also has a number of information security requirements. And so, you continue to see overlap in competing functions that create almost many fiefdoms in certain organizations. And we think that there's opportunity to remove some of that duplication and replication and standardize. The risk appetite alignment, organizations tend to have a very good tone in terms of where they want to be on risk. The boards do a nice job of explaining to management what their expectations are and what their tolerance is. Going back and revisiting the frameworks and understanding how they all come together again, provides opportunity for organizations to be able to translate that. And then from a data-driven standpoint, I think that this is where a lot of organizations have opportunity. We're working with AI models. We're working with other types of ways of looking at the controls across the organization and starting to figure out the musts, the shoulds within the policies and procedure documents. We're trying to figure out where those intersections and overlaps occur and be able to identify those and create reporting that might come from a center and be able to be pushed out across the different competing groups within the organization. Sachin, you've been having success with helping your clients adopt different frameworks, but you've been doing something a little bit different lately. Do you want to maybe give an example?
Absolutely. And some of you on the call may think, this seems a little out of place. We're certainly talking about agile, but we wanted to specifically call this out here since most of the companies have, already adopted agile as their development methodology. So this is, highly likely you will end up using this. And when you are going through a controls transformation optimization effort, it's not going to be in a silo, right? It's not going to be a very dedicated team that is just you have to work with technology, you have to work with business, you have to work with enabling areas within the organization. So this sort of construct helps with that. Now you'll ask me why would we've not seen agile in the construct of controls as frequently, but using an agile methodology, what we've seen is sort of helps manage uncertainty, these continuous changes in business process as you deliver a controls transformation program. It'll help you deliver with focus and momentum, kind of, have more focused engagement of process owners and other stakeholders when it's really challenging to balance. Because remember, these are all like business stakeholders that have to do their, business as usual activities also. And then you have, the agility and flexibility that just comes natural to the agile process. So the way we've typically done it on a lot of our different projects is you start with a solid planning effort upfront, which is decide which end-to-end process is going to get covered in which sprint, getting the right stakeholders involved for that end-to-end process, and then you just get your design principles right at the outset, create the correct governance structure and all. Once you have all that, again, every time you talk about controls, it has to start with the process, right? So you likely, if you look at a sprint, 3 to 4 weeks, week one initial is going to be understanding the process, building out the end-to-end process flow, sub-process flow, and getting all that buttoned out. Because most of our organizations have like evolved over a period of time. When the controls were initially set up, the process used to look like something, but has evolved over a period of time, but may look completely different now. So having that unified understanding across the board for everybody that is involved in this effort from a process standpoint is very important. And then from process comes the risk element, which Stu was talking about earlier. So then you're building your risk landscape, which you see here in the steps 3, which is leading to your the breakdown of the process, and then you come to step 4, which is building your risk landscape. So as you build your risk landscape, then you are going into understanding the prioritization of risk, the impact, likelihood, risk appetite, linkage to KRIs, all the good things that we were looking at in the previous slide. And then finally, all that leads to is what are the controls that are needed to mitigate the risk. So if you're going through an optimization exercise, you may already have a fully robust risk and control framework, which has been living through ages and ages. But now the lens is, do we have controls that are mitigating the risks that are needed, or do we have more? Are we over controlled? Are we under controlled? Do we have the right level of automation? So you're bringing those modernization principles while building all these activities together. And if automation is a key emphasis here, as we've seen, like it has to be, then this is where you would bake in the technology layer. Is here are the controls that we used to have. Now we're going to move to a more automated way of doing certain things, and then you bake that into your agile framework, so to speak. And then last thing, which is the most important in our experience that we've seen, number 9 that you see there is change management, because it's just critical for any successful implementation. Understanding where the changes are, who is impacted, how do we train them, how do we get them to understand the new ways of doing business. That is very important, because these conversations tend to gravitate towards controls and technology, but we tend to forget it's people behind all these that have to do the final working, so to speak. So that's how we've approached it, and it's been fairly successful on a lot of different engagements where we've been able to automate these controls. As I go to the next slide, I'll take the liberty of covering the next 2 slides here, since they are kind of closely tied to automation aspects, which is very near and dear to my heart. So we'll speak about controls automation. What are the factors that we typically think about from a future state standpoint? So what you see here is these are essentially considerations from a control standpoint, not necessarily technology, platform, assurance, monitoring. It's more of like individual control. So as you're going through your controls, what you want to do is you want to look at these different avenues to modernize them. So if I look at the first one there, this is utilizing inbuilt system configurations to support the control, so to speak. So typical things like parameters and configurations, three-way match, duplicate invoice, like things like those that you can rely on more versus manual processes. It will inherently move the needle towards automated controls and allow you to monitor them also more effectively. Similarly, workflows. Most of the business applications in today's day and age support inherent workflows. If they don't, there is usually a third-party solution out there that provides a wrapper on top of a business transaction or a master data activity that you can use. So moving to inherent system-built workflows eliminates these, manual activities around authorization matrices, and testing those becomes, really painful in the end. System reports, something that usually is ignored when looking at business applications, but it's very useful, especially now in today's day and age when there's so much data available. You can easily do ad hoc reporting out of your applications to support controls and risk-based reporting. And then, control evidence, very, very common example of that is when we're building these interfaces, integrations with applications, you have to evidence completeness, accuracy, and things like that. But building all that inherently into your integration framework could save you a lot of trouble by not having to do these testing and validation every year for each of these integrations that you build, for example. And similarly, last one is non-standard development. So we know in all of our landscape there are going to be systems that are not going to be as easy in terms of automation. So what are the creative ways of sort of like the last mile of automation there? RPA, other methods, and bringing the data over to a data lake, whatever is the right way for you. But that is going to be a critical element. Otherwise, you'll always have that last mile, which is still manual in nature. Now, as we talk about automation, if you've gone through that exercise of looking at all your controls, finding out what is the best and optimized automated way of doing it, then comes the question of, how do we, build a more sustainable monitoring and assurance platform framework for us. And in this, naturally, a lot of this conversation gravitates towards the center one, which is, do we have the right tool? That's where people gravitate towards, and it becomes very tool-centric conversation. Now, if you have a tool like Pathlog, for example, it'll give you the capabilities that you need, right? But what we've seen is it's increasingly more important to focus on the other fours that you see there, because this is a new way of doing business. This is a new way of doing controls and monitoring them, and you need different set of capabilities. And when we talk about operating model in a few slides down, then we'll emphasize more on that. But because this is a new way of doing business in a controls environment, you probably need different capabilities, different reporting, different mindset, as well as skills and talent that go with it. So it's equally important to focus on those because those can make or break your program in the longer term. To just give you an example, like if you're going towards a more exception-based reporting framework for your controls, in the old world, your first line business was running the reports to validate certain control elements and putting that into your controls evidence repository, and that would be tested by either your management or your external audit. But as you move towards more exception based, the GRC tool, for instance, is doing that monitoring for you. It's looking at the configuration and telling you constantly, hey, your configuration is correct, or hey, I see a deviation in your configuration. But these alerts or exceptions are getting generated across all your controls, across all your systems. From a future readiness standpoint, what is that capability, that group of team, or um, people that are sitting there that would be looking at these alerts, who is going to be dispositioning it, who is consuming that data and taking actions. Is it still the business? Is it COE? Like all those things have to be thought through when you're defining your monitoring and assurance framework, so to speak. With that, I think, Stu, there were some concrete examples that we wanted to give, like this one here that you had recently done. Do you want to cover that one?
Yeah, that'd be great, Sachin. Thank you. And so I wanted to talk with the audience a little bit about one of our clients that's made the shift. They were sitting about 18 months ago, or almost 2 years ago. One of my friends gave me a call, and she was working through challenges related to material weakness that she had in her company's financial statements. It was related to management's challenges that they had related to journal entry monitoring, not necessarily what was going on at corporate, but what was going on in different divisions around the globe, and how corporate would have command over those transactions that were happening around the globe. And so ultimately it rolled up into a material weakness for the organization, something that no one wants to have to deal with, and no one wants to have to remediate or cure against it. Around that time, we got on the phone and we started talking about some of the challenges that they had within the organization, not just in terms of journal entries, because that was really a symptom of something else that was going on. We talked about the control program. She was new to the organization. What was her remit? What was being asked? Obviously, making the material weakness go away was number one. And the way that the organization had been approaching the remedial steps in the past was, throwing more bodies at it. Let's take a very manual approach. We'll go through each entry. We'll make sure that the supporting documentation makes sense, that we've got everything that we need, so that when the auditors come in, we'll have confidence that it was done the way we expect it to be done, and B, that the auditors won't find anything, right? And, that approach works until it doesn't, and it's incredibly costly to have 30 plus people doing nothing but this monitoring, right? And very few organizations could afford that, and it's certainly not sustainable. And so what we talked about was, hey, let's, you get through this year, right? Because sorry, December, you're not going to invoke any serious change. As soon as you file, let's take a deep dive into this. Let's take a look at what the challenge is, and let's see if there's a smarter way to do this. And so within about 6 weeks, we stood up a monitoring tool or solution for them. They call it Nexus. And basically, it's created a tool that gathers it creates about 30 different dashboards for management to evaluate each period. And it's got the key components of the control. Hey, are the journal entries good? Are there fraud risk factors? Are there any number of challenges and issues that we might see in there? But also at the same time, they were able to say, well, geez, if we're already getting this data, what else can we do with it? And then they started to look at, how do you optimize the business differently? And how do you start to identify things that would indicate we've got the wrong people at the keyboard for the wrong entries. We're creating journal entries that just don't make sense because the dollars are so small. We should just automate those, and we can apply a threshold and we'll be okay. There were a number of areas where they were able to train their people better and get to the specific people that needed support in different ways. And they were able to reallocate tasks to people that were better suited to getting it done versus just going through the same process over and over again. And so at the end of the day, what we did with them was, again, we created about 30 different dashboards. They print the data on close day 6. Close day 7, they get their dashboards back, and they replaced a number of manual controls that were happening around the world at a very granular level with a top-side review of all journal entries that were occurring in the company, instead of going division by division and having that as the key control, which obviously you continue to do because that's good business. But from a key control standpoint, they were able to elevate that. And so from a SOX standpoint, these journal entries allowed them to pull 36 days out of their year that was previously dedicated to monitoring, to testing, and other activities that is not revenue generating, right? So that was a huge win for the controls function to be able to do that. They did cure their material weakness, and they've been able to use this as a springboard to launch other digital programs through the organization. So now they are on the cusp of launching a fully digitized SOX scoping tool that will be refreshed each period based on data, or I'm sorry, each quarter based on the period by period data coming out of their consolidation system. They're looking at different tools related to monitoring other transactions like payments, like cash flow, and other areas. And so it's been a wild success for them as they continue to find opportunities to take effort out of their program. But at the same time, the controls function is going back to the business with all sorts of insights that are helping them to operate better, to save money, and to move faster. And so that's been seen as a key win. And you're starting to see the upside of control with this organization, whereas most people are focused on the downside, the punitive aspects of controls. They're out there and saying, geez, hey, we could do this differently. We can operate with confidence because we have the ability to monitor from the center and understand that if we take this risk, if we make this adjustment, we'll be okay because we still have the seatbelts, the airbags in place where we need them in order to make those changes. So that's been fantastic.
Operating model. And I'm sure, as Stu was mentioning the previous example of, journal entry and financial reporting where, we used analytics-based method. That could be applicable to various different areas, and as you mentioned, that sort of became a springboard. So, if you are an organization that would eventually go down that path, operating model, having an operating model to go with it is going to be very important for a long-term sustainment of the solution, so to speak. So what we've seen is it's a different kind of mindset of operating the controls. And to a certain extent, I mean, if you look at the last bullet in the slide, which talks about technology and data and AI, I mean, we all know this is eventually at some point in the future, there's going to be a co-pilot which will do the controls analysis, gathering data performance for you, and then the person sort of becomes responsible for reviewing that and updating it and confirming that, so to speak. So in that sort of world, you definitely do need a different skill set capability. Even the lesser mature models that are out there in the market where it's the model is getting trained as you move along, the person who is the control owner has to have a different skill set also in order to adjust the model, because you are training the model to grow as you go along, and this will be a journey. So even if it is very rudimentary, even if it is very high end, so to speak, the automation, the skill set and the capabilities will be needed by whoever is doing the controls. And that could be an easy catch-22, so to speak, because you are automating and relieving effort for the business stakeholders to focus on certain other things, more strategic things, and this could be one of them, which is upskilling the capabilities, so to speak. Similarly, you have, just the organization structure around it, the ambition, how do you maintain it, how does it sustain, what is the culture around it? Because if you think about just controls, it's usually a very draining topic for people who are not involved in the process, so to speak. And we'll talk about this in the next slide where we give you another example. But essentially, that's the thing. Like, are we using technology modernization to improve the perception, the culture that goes around the controls aspect of things? So as I mentioned, these topics, they are very closely tied to this example where we, took similar approach as Stu was mentioning in one of the previous slides, where there was one example, but we took that holistic approach, applied it to the entire organization, so to speak. So before we go into what we did, you look at the right side North Star. 70% automation, it was the outcome, which is fairly good if you look at an organization that had very little automated controls right at the outset when we started the project. So it was very heavy manual, grown over the years, so to speak. Then you have 20% reduction in cost per control. And that varies, like depending on how automated and how data enabled your controls become. There is cost associated with performing the controls, like an internal cost, so to speak. There is cost in terms of testing the control. That could be internal audit. There is obviously cost associated with external audit. So the spectrum of reduction is very broad, and just on an average 20% reduction across the board was fairly substantial if you look at it from a total cost of compliance standpoint. And then the third, which was the most exciting part, is achieving a positive net promoter score. And this is kind of tied to the topic I was mentioning earlier, like the conversation of controls, unless you are like responsible for it, is usually very draining. So using automation and modernization to get to a state where you are getting a positive NPS is a win-win for everybody. And then finally, getting everybody that's involved was trained and updated, upskilled into newer ways of doing the business, and that helped from a people standpoint, like personal development also. So if you now tie back to what was done, like these are all the things that we did on the project, which is starting with rebaselining the controls, identifying which controls can be automated, building monitoring solutions for automated controls, enabling data and analytics to support performance of these controls, and then all the testing, organization design, fit for IT that goes with it. So essentially all the things that we talked about, which is modernizing the controls and eliminating redundancy, removing the manual aspects which are draining to most of our business stakeholders, converting them to more automated controls, and having a monitoring process around it. That was the overall project, and that led to the outcome that you are seeing there on the right side. I think with that, I'll hand it over to Stu to take us home with the last few slides.
Okay, so we just have a couple more slides to go, but we also ensure that we answer any questions that the audience has. So if you do have any, please feel free to put it into the chat, and we will do our best to get to them before we break. So as we've been talking about, we've given some examples of where our clients have found success by invoking this line of thinking. And when we think about what works and why our clients should consider this going forward, obviously at a time like now, there's demands on everyone to find cost savings. And what we found is that by aligning the frameworks, by digitizing and taking a digital first principle to future controls and future ways of monitoring, there is cost takeout that comes. We're reducing duplicate efforts. We are taking people away from doing things that they don't enjoy doing, hunting, gathering information, staging it to be reviewed, putting it in a way that a third party can then come in and look at on the back end. And all of that takes time and effort, and it's usually not the most efficient or effective use of your people in the organization. And so we're able to take that out. Automation. By focusing on automation, we think that the majority of controls in an organization, whether they can be fully automated or tech-enabled, there is tremendous opportunity there for that. For instance, the dashboards that we showed a couple of slides ago, as well as I've got one organization now, a bank, where instead of manually keying in credit decision memos, they're experimenting with large language models. And can we have those get some key inputs and crank out the model after the announcement, after the decision has been made, but in a personal way that takes into effect the relationship that the bank has with that particular customer. Whereas before, it would take someone quite a while to crank out a handwritten letter. Now they have a template that they can use that's being cranked out by the system in a much more effective way, still fitting within the guardrails of all the litany of regs that the bank must comply with. From a performance standpoint, people tend to be happier when they're doing their best work, and that results in, we have seen organizations see indirect enhancement of their net promoter scores as people are focused on doing what matters and doing a great job of it. Obviously, we talked about operational efficiencies and gains, and then from a risk mitigation standpoint, you can really dial up and find that right effective dose for the right controls against the right risks in the organizations. It's not a peanut butter approach. And if you think about the slide that Sachin showed before with the agile adaptability in terms of the framework, we would recommend to our clients that you don't boil the ocean all at once. You run it in sprints, you find your successes, you leverage those successes to build the program, and success begets success. And it generally finds with some of the quick wins that we've been helping our clients get up front, cutting out millions of dollars in duplicate payments, even though they have systems that are supposed to be looking specifically for that. Being able to reduce the number of people dedicated to manual oversight and control, being able to spot things related to management override on the financial side, expediting the way that management can conduct fraud investigations or respond when hit by a cyber attack. Those are all things that this future of controls enables the organization to do in new and different ways. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, and so the typical journey on this, again, generally that business case and what we're seeing at a lot of organizations is more of a mandate right now. Hey, we want to see more automation. We want to see this controls program evolve. We can't continue doing the same things we've been doing for the last 15, 20 years. Even a lot of challenge in organizations related to their ERM frameworks and why haven't things moved over the last several years. So set that business case. Start off by identifying where there's opportunities to harmonize those control frameworks. Go in with a digital first strategy, and that's a whole separate discussion on how you identify where the low-hanging fruit is and how you get maximum value and return in your pilot use cases. Re-engineering that operating model, identifying who that quasi chief controls officer might be. In banks, you would actually have a chief controls officer, and many of our other clients, you wouldn't have someone with that official title. And then from there, empowering that first line to be able to be true owner operators of those controls, looking for the things that matter and not waiting for internal audit to tell them that something happened 6 months ago, 9 months ago, whatever it might be, by the time they get their report out. And then finally, establishing that continuous monitoring program and be able to report out on that effectively in ways that resonate with leadership. Last slide, please. Okay, and so key takeaways, and then again, if you have any questions, we'd love to answer them. But key takeaways being, one, empower that first line, understand that culture of control and what does it mean, what's the value and the value drivers that are coming, and how do you get the organization organized and behind that program. Two, tone at the top, set that message out and get that going. You want to reward and announce through internal communications what those success stories are. We've seen a lot of great progress at our clients where the controls function is now being proactively brought in to support different initiatives because they want their feedback. They want to be able to get them stood up right up front as opposed to doing firefighting and triage on the back end. And sometimes that's as part of an ERP project, sometimes that's as part of a strategic acquisition or a merger, or other transformational projects like a finance transformation that might be underway. And then, finally, if you're monitoring, you should be able to measure that, right? And so you should be able to report out on what has changed, not just in terms of the number of exceptions going down and the things that, you're reporting out on, but also culturally what's changed. Are people more effective in their job? Are you able to get by putting less impetus on each individual? Who are those champions in the organization, and what has that really meant? So with that, we'll open up the floor for any Q&A that might exist. Otherwise, I'm not seeing anything yet in the chat. Stephanie, are you seeing anything on your end, or?
Yeah, we just had one question earlier that I wanted to address. It was asked if we will be sending out these slides. We won't be sending out the slides, but we will be sending out the recording of the presentation next week. So anyone who registered for this session will get the recording, just not the slides. But yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions right now, but if you do have any more questions, I just wanted to encourage you to email us. You can email us at info@pathwalk.com, and we would be happy to answer any of those in the future. And I just wanted to thank everyone for coming. Remember that we do have more sessions coming up throughout the day. You can go to our homepage. I'm going to put it in the chat right now. It's pathwalk.com/innovation-series. I just put the link to that. Hold on, let me put this in the chat. I just put that in the chat for everyone. So if you'd like to check out any of our other sessions coming up, our next session is titled How to De-risk Your S/4HANA Upgrade Strategy, and that will be with Protiviti. So if you'd like to join that, go ahead and register, and I put the link in the chat for that as well. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Stu and Sachin, for your presentation, and we hope to see you again next time.